Hey, everybody. We've got a special treat for you this week. We're going to go over V-Ray in Rhino, and this is our rendering software that we really love to use. And I wanted to bring in an expert on the subject, someone who is even more knowledgeable than I about it. And so I asked a dear friend of mine to walk through some of this stuff with you. And he's someone that many of you may already know and love. The one and only Chris Wall is going to be assisting me this week with our V-Ray tutorials. So please, please give him your undivided attention, follow along, and I'm going to quickly let me share my screen. There's a couple things I want to show you before we dive in. Um, what we are going to do is look at Chaos Cosmo assets. So you should have access to this through your V-Ray on your computer. However, I have heard that in the past, some people have had trouble accessing this the way that Chris shows you how to in the video. So Chris also walks you through a backup, um, and that is through the Polyhaven uh, website. So this is another great place to find 3D assets and HDRIs and various textures, which is basically an asset library, the same way that Chaos Cosmos is, except Chaos is built into V-Ray. It's supposed to be. If for any reason you are unable to get in and you really want to use Chaos, what you can do is you can type in Chaos Cosmos and go to Get Assets. And this is free with any free trial. So you can make a 30-day free trial for this. And if for some reason you don't already have it with your school V-Ray account, then you can just quickly make a private account for 30 days. And that free trial will get you access to all of these assets. So you have a lot of options going into this, um, just depending on what route you want to go. But we're going to go over lighting, asset creation, asset usage, and all sorts of fun textures and HDRIs. So buckle up. I will be in on Thursday to help walk through some of this as well. This is broken up into two parts for you, so it's easier to digest. So start with this one, and then I will intro the second video as well. So without further ado, I'm going to cut over to Chris.
Okay, today we're going to learn how to use V-Ray for Rhino. So the first thing you want to do is change your current render from the default, which is Rhino render, to V-Ray for Rhino. We'll start with showing how to use dome lights. So if we just draw a simple box, we can switch our view to render. We might want to use Arctic for this. First thing I like to do is set up layers. So we'll call this box. Then we can set up a V-Ray layer. Then we can start making sublayers. So let's call this dome light. That's all right. Okay, so with this layer selected, we can go to V-Ray. Actually, first, you want to have this V-Ray all tab open at the top here. So what you can do if you don't see this is go to show toolbar. Then you should be able to scroll down. As long as V-Ray is installed on your computer, select V-Ray all. This is a useful tool to have, so just drop it up top. So right here we can see dome light. This is probably the easiest way to produce lighting in V-Ray. So we can drop this in. What it's asking for now is the dome light texture. So I'm going to show you how to do it through V-Ray Chaos Cosmos, but that's $100 license. If you do not have V-Ray Chaos, go ahead and open your browser. You can go to what used to be HDRI Haven, now it's called Polyhaven. And here you'll find a variety of light sources. HDRs are basically like a bitmap of sort of a sky, but also produces lighting that aligns with sort of the source of the lighting. So in this one, lighting would be coming from this sunlight here. So you can just come here, select the file that you'd want. I believe you need an account to download these, but it's free. So when you get prompted with this, just have it in your downloads file, and you'll see the HDR that you downloaded. You can click open, but through V-Ray, we'll do asset editor, and then also we'll open up Chaos Cosmos. And here it just kind of makes the whole process a little simpler. There's basically three different types of HDR files in Chaos Cosmos. You're gonna have like studio lighting, which produces kind of like ambient occlusion type lighting, like softer lights and softer shadows. And then you'll have night lighting and day lighting. Um, it's there's a large amount of files here, but I found maybe three HDRs that work the best. Daylight '08 seems to work really well. The night lights can be a little tricky. Um, Often you might need to Photoshop to get the sort of lighting that you want. So I try to stay away from night lighting, but we can open maybe one of these just to show how it would look. So let's just download kind of a random one. First you'll download it and then you'll get prompted with this kind of green arrow. What that's going to do is import it over here. So you'll see we have the day '08 and the sunset 24. And then also I like to use the sort of studio lighting. It seems to make the process a little simpler. And if you're using Photoshop alongside this, you can still get sort of you can import a sky into the background. So once we have done that, let's open up the dome light. Oh, sorry, we already have a dome light here, but you notice you won't see it in sort of any of the rendered views, whether it's Arctic or rendered. So you want to switch over to, I like to use ghosted. So right now we have this sort of dome light here with an arrow that's pointing. It's sort of counterintuitive. You'd think that the arrow is pointing the direction of the light, but it's actually pointing to where the light's coming from. So in this case, the lighting would be on our left-hand side. It'd be coming from this side. You generally want the lighting pointing towards your object. So with the arrow pointing away. Also, so some basic stuff you want to set up in your asset editor. If you're working on a school computer, CPU might be your best bet, but if you're working from a laptop or any desktop that you own and it has a graphics card, switch it to RTX. It it's basically rendering off either the CPU or your graphics card, and the graphics card is going to be a little bit easier to use, and it'll make your renders go a little quicker. Also turn on denoiser through V-Ray. So camera is basically setting up. Actually, tr no need to really mess with anything in this for what we're doing. But you will want to change your render output. So I like to typically use the 16:9. That's basically like a standard screen size. And then if you're doing renderings for your architecture projects, um, it sort of fits nicely onto. You can also set a custom one. So if you're printing on 17:11s, you could set your width to 17 and 11, and then now you have a render that'll fit nicely onto that. Just try to think about what size you're going to use to represent, like what sort of paper size you're going to use to represent the project, and set your aspect to that. And then for your image width and height, what this is basically setting like the resolution of the the rendering. It sort of depends how you're going to represent it. And also this is what will typically slow down the rendering most. So you don't want to kind of go too far with this, but I like to use something kind of like standard, like a 2400. And then with this locked, it'll automatically change this to another resolution. Um, I think if you're using something on a screen, you might want to bump it up maybe slightly more, but in general, this will be plenty. You could also do something like, I try not to go anything lower than like 1200. So in this case, we'd want to change this one to 1200 because it's automatically going to bump that up. We definitely don't want to put this at 1200 because then our other aspect or our other kind of resolution in the vertical direction will be kind of small. And it might be okay for what you're doing, but in general, I try to do a higher resolution, especially if you're rendering off a graphics card, it'll go much quicker. So I'll set this to 2400 for now. Um, Animation, we don't probably won't talk about in this tutorial. Environment's not important. This is really useful material override, and I'll kind of come back to that maybe once we show how this is how the dome lights are working. So I've just opened up kind of an interactive view. Just gonna think for a second. Okay, so now we sort of have a lighting going on here. Sorry, let me pull this to the side. Maybe I can do this like this. Okay, so you notice that the lighting isn't great right now. And the reason that is the case is we want to go to Asset Editor. We want to go to this little light tab, and you'll see we have a dome light here. This is the kind of working alongside this dome light that we dropped in. So what we want to do is first kind of open the side box. We can come back here and select the day 08, or sorry, let's use Studio for now. You're gonna right click and copy, and then come back to the lighting dome light. And then this little box here, this is where you're going to right click again and paste as a copy. And then make sure you check this box. Now what this dome light is going to do is use the HDRI that we sent that we imported earlier. So now we have sort of a much better kind of lighting going on. And if we want to kind of see ground shadow, let's go ahead and drop a box, sorry, a plane below. Okay, now we should be getting some ground shadows. You'll notice with studio lighting, you get much softer shadows. Let's just give it a second to kind of render in here. Also, might be useful to know, we go here, we can go back to our dome light and go to options. I like to typically make the um, kind of the background of the rendering. You want to check the box for invisible because it sometimes is easier. The skies that we will use from HDR files can look a little off maybe. So it might be easier to check it as invisible. And what it does is basically get rid of the sort of background of the rendering, and then you can Photoshop in any sky that you would choose. Okay, so let's just run this render real quick. With rendering off graphics cards, it should be very quick, especially since we're not using any materials and it's kind of a dumb geometry. It also might be useful to know about setting up viewports. So if we find a sort of angle that we want to use, maybe like a top kind of, sorry, maybe like a top kind of view, or we can just use one of the typical kind of isometric views. We can go ahead and save it over here on the right. And let's just name it ISO1. So now we have this saved under this kind of camera tab. If you don't have this, you can open it. Yeah, open it here on this side. You can also just do view, set view, and then go to named views. And then that'll also prompt this sort of box on the right. So also our rendering finished over here. Um, it looks like it's pretty clear. So I think that's a good resolution for what we're doing. Um, let's go ahead and run a rendering with one of the other lights so we can see how that looks. So let's do this day 08. I find this one to be kind of the best to produce like a daylight effect. So we'll copy it just like we did before. We'll paste it as a copy. And then no, let's run it and then see. You'll notice on the right, it's looks very, very bright. And now that it's rendering out, it's extremely bright. We almost can't even see the image. This is because daylights, for whatever reason, don't use kind of like a one value like studio lights. Typically like a really good range to use for these is to start at 0.015, and then we can click enter. And now we're gonna have something that looks much better. So yeah, you can see our lighting is facing, this arrow over here is facing towards the left-hand side of our screen, and the shadows are getting cast to the right-hand side. So we can quickly run this rendering. Also from V-Ray, don't know if I said this before, check from your asset editor, check progressive rendering up here. I can't do it because I'm running a rendering now, but make sure this is on. Okay, yeah, so this is kind of a daylighting effect. Let's drop down maybe kind of more from an elevation view. Let's go back to V-Ray asset editor and then check. Let's turn off invisible so I can show you what the sort of sky effects look like. Okay, there you go. Sometimes when you're looking more elevational views, it'll do some weird things with the background sky. So you see it's kind of disappearing here. At some point we should see the. Okay, let's. Seems like something weird is happening. Let's go back. Select day again, copy, paste it back over, and maybe this will. Yeah, so we're seeing the sky now. Maybe let's pick one. Seems like we're missing the clouds. Let's try a different one. Just import day 34. Copy this. Maybe stop the interactive render while we do this. Okay, something weird's happening with our clouds. They're not being shown in the rendering. Let's like circle back to that. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about maybe is how to import materials. So again, you can download materials kind of from a variety of websites online. Polyhaven should have a good amount of a pretty large material library, but for this tutorial, we'll just kind of be using Chaos Cosmos. So we can select materials here. Maybe let's make this concrete. So what this is saying down here, this is basically the kind of box mapping. This number here will like coordinate with the box mapping that we want to set. Because if we take this material and import it, we can either select this object and apply to selection. And now we're kind of getting this concrete texture onto our kind of box over here. Or we can do apply to layer and apply it to the box layer. Also, it's useful to know as you sort of build up larger files, you can sort of get confused where all your materials are going. So if you have these set here, you can click select objects, select objects and scene. And what's done is select all the objects that are using the concrete texture. So we can see the kind of what's called a box map of this texture is way out of scale. So what you want to do is type in the command apply box map. And then you'll just click a point. When we go back to here, we see it's set to 400 centimeters. So we can type 400 centimeters, enter. Since it's a box, all dimensions are going to be 400 centimeters, so you can just hit enter and it'll automatically kind of call off the previous prompt. And then when you get to caps, just click enter again. And map channel, for whatever reason, sort of the more times you add a material to an object, it'll try to put it on a different mapping channel, but the only one that'll be visible in the kind of V-Ray window will be the channels on number one. So we just hit one and enter. And now the um, kind of mapping of the object is much more in scale. Part of this has to do with the size of this box that we created. It's probably pretty small. Um, let's go ahead. So what we can also do from V-Ray, let's make one called person. From Chaos Cosmos, we can also import 3D files like people. Let's just pick a standing model. Let's import this guy. And then we'll again just hit this kind of green button. Make sure we're on the right layer because it typically it can get easy to put objects on the wrong layer and then it's a lot harder to find them. So let's drop this guy in here. And then escape. So now we have a guy kind of a 3D file of a guy kind of imported into our Rhino file. Yeah, and now it's a lot easier to see that the scale of this concrete texture seems about right. So maybe a slightly more advanced but useful to know kind of thing you can do in Chaos Cosmos is or sorry, through V-Ray is if we use something like vegetation, we can select sorry, let's do vegetation, flowers and grass. So we can choose maybe something simple like this sort of Japanese grass. And let's make a new layer first. Sorry. Let's call it grass. Drop it on our V-Ray layer. Import this again. Make sure it's checked on the grass layer, and then we can paste it onto the ground there. So what we have is kind of this single piece of grass, but an easy way to kind of scatter it's actually called scatter this grass across this ground plane that we have would be to do open back up our asset editor, kind of this little circle with a plus sign, go to geometries and then scatter. Select our ground plane and click apply to selection. So it's created kind of like a scatter plane onto our ground. We can take our grass texture and then go back to our scatter and click, make sure your grass is selected. Click add guest. So we're starting to see kind of like a scatter of grass now on our kind of rendering here. But it seems pretty sparse. So let's do density here. And just be careful because this can really kind of overwhelm the computer, especially working in interactive. So we might want to stop the interactive render for now. Um, and then we can up the density of the grass. So let's do something like 100 and see how that looks. Okay, yeah. Now we have a much denser. You kind of see these. It'll basically import them as bounding boxes. You can actually do it here. You probably want bounding box. The view, you can either turn it off. The objects will still be there, but it basically just makes it easier for your computer to kind of handle while you're working. But let's do bounding boxes for now. And it looks pretty dense, so maybe we can bump this down to 50 and see how that looks. Yeah, I think that's plenty. Um, so let's start back up our interactive render again. Okay, it's still pretty sparse, but what we can kind of do is go back to V-Ray, Chaos Cosmos. Again, all these kind of 3D files you can find online, or you can find these sort of textures online. Let's do materials, ground, and let's grab a grass file. So the reason you might not want to just use a sort of grass bitmap by itself is because it'll appear really flat when we import these 3D grass textures through rendering, it'll look much more three-dimensional. They'll actually cast sort of shadows and you can kind of, yeah, so let's take this grass. Believe we already imported it. Open up our asset editor. We can take grass layer, apply to layer, then move this to the proper layer to start. So let's name this ground plane. Okay, now let's apply this to, let's give it a second. Ground plane. It's sort of thinking. Okay, now we have like a much more realistic kind of looking ground texture. Let's do maybe up the scatter slightly. Just to be safe, you might want to stop your interactive rendering while you're editing things, especially moving assets. For instance, like this guy. Um, V-Ray has a tendency to kind of crash when you're moving assets, and then you'll have to save the file and reopen it. So it's kind of a burden. I like to just be on the safe side and turn the interactive off while you're moving assets. We'll go back down to scatter, bump this up to maybe 80. And let's try to set up maybe kind of a scene here. The Chaos Cosmos, you also have a large variety of 3D assets. Lots of people, but also lots of furniture. Oh, sorry. Let's do outdoor furniture. And maybe we can just grab this hammock, drop it in. Okay. Okay, let's run this and see how it looks. Yeah, so the lighting doesn't look great. So maybe we select our dome light and kind of rotate it. This is something that might produce some more shadows. Yeah, so we're starting to get shadows on the backhand side there. Yeah. So something that might be nice for, depending what type of render you're using, is switching your properties. Sorry. You can't have anything selected when you do this. Go down to projection and set 2-point projection. What this will do is kind of keep your verticals parallel to one another. Zoom in on this. And let's go ahead and just run the render. Yeah, so for whatever reason, we weren't getting clouds in the background before, but they seem to be appearing now. But as you see, they're a little, to me, they aren't super realistic, I guess. They kind of come across a little cheesy. So I like to check the invisible box and then just drop in a sky using Photoshop. Our grass texture might, oh, sorry. So what's happening here is we never set a box map for our ground plane. So let's go back here, select objects, apply box map. And if you forgot the number, you can find it in the V-Ray asset editor. And then our grass is 200 centimeters. So let's do 200 centimeters. Cap, yes, and just go ahead and hit enter. And the reason we're not seeing it over here is because we're running an actual rendering, so it's not going to update things that we are doing in the Rhino file, but if we turn that off and then do start interactive, this gray line in the background here, this is because we sort of don't have a ground plane that runs to the horizon of our rendering. So what you could do a couple different things. Again, you can either turn off you can make the HDR file invisible, and then you can drop a photoshopped kind of sky in this region. Or you can extend the ground plane far enough, like extend this ground plane far enough into the distance to where you kind of don't get this line in the background. You can also kind of pick a pick an angle to where that goes away. Now we're pretty low in the image, but that the kind of horizon line is gone away. You can also sorry, give me a second. Asset editor. We can select our dome light and then do shape and do sphere. Yeah, so it's a little bit better. We're still getting kind of this gray off in the distance, but again, that's easy to kind of correct in Photoshop. So the reason I don't like to use some of these dome lights is because the clouds in this are pretty distracting. So that's why I suggest just using kind of a simple um kind of simple HDRI. Let's paste this one in. Yeah, this is, I think, a little bit better. Okay, so say we want to add some objects to this scene. Let's just draw maybe another box here. A simple way to let's go back to asset editor. Shoot, sorry. Let's take this concrete again and let's just select this object, apply to selection. Or probably best to just change the object layer. Okay, let's run this rendering again. Okay, so you see how the texture of what we just added is off from our original kind of cube. So the simplest way to fix this, you can either just apply the box mapping again, or you can select this object that we just dropped in and then do go to your properties, and then you'll see this kind of like, it's called texture mapping. Click this, and then if you go to this paintbrush, while your object's selected over here, you can select a source. So let's select this object. Let's give it a second to update. So what it's done is kind of now it's reading the box mapping is reading both these objects um, as being kind of like a continuous surface. Okay, let's stop here for now, and then I'll pick up in another file.